We know that there are a couple of things that we're trying to do in this phase that are really important. Okay, we have spent a long time today having some pretty significant conversations about big issues. So my head is spinning. Yours is, are you a little tired? Right? Okay, so but this is the hardest and most important piece, because as we sift through all of that information and discover the things that we want to fix, and we've not been, we've not been focusing on all those positives. We've been trying to sift through and find things that we want to figure out what's going on and how we can fix it and what we can do. Then this is the phase where we spend a lot of time doing that. So we're going to prioritize some of these findings that we had from here. And as we go back, we're probably going to unearth some of these assumptions that may be very real in the end. They might not really be assumptions. Well, they were in phase 1, but they might be causes that we need to look at in phase 3. I think the one that Jenny unearthed about teachers' comfort level in math, for example, or science or whatever, I think is pretty profound, actually. And that one should play out as a causal theory. So what we're going to want to do, of course, is to identify some of those. Think about ways of confirming that those, in fact, are the issues or potential issues to that particular problem. And then if we were to finish this completely, which we won't do today, we would actually have an action plan for what we're going to do. And I think the filter is, do we need to add anything? Remember, these were the prioritized things. If you remember that big, huge room that we were in this room with about 35 people last June, we prioritized down to these really big issues that John and Charlie and all the principals and you guys have all been working on. So, as we look through all of this data from a slightly different lens, is there anything else that we're going to want to bring to the table at some point to make this day worthwhile for you? As well, not just being superstars that you are, but to something that you can take back to the work. If you also remember, there are 6 causal theories. Wellman and Lipton say 5. Grant says 6. I always win. I'm in control of the PowerPoint. Okay, because we have to add leadership here. What's the one that's missing?
Home.
Home. Why is home missing, Laura?
Because we
can't control it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to think about, in your table, some of these, and there's a lot of ideas that are thrown out here. So you're going to have to choose one, because you can't do them all. Okay, choose what you think is significant from your list. Okay, and remember that what we'll do is we'll look at each of the causal theories to see if they contribute positively or negatively to whatever issue that you have chosen to focus on. Okay, and then we'll chart those contributions, whether they were negative or positive. If we were going to continue this conversation, which we'll try to do a little bit of this, we'll start to think about how we might confirm some of those. How do we know that is really a problem? And then we can maybe think about what ways we would fix that. Does everybody remember very clearly the differences between those? There's 3 of them that are people. 3 of them that are things. So if I said, those teachers just don't have enough collaboration time, where does that go? Is that a teacher thing? Infrastructure, right. Because remember, when we talk about teachers, we're talking about them as people. Students, we're talking about them as people. And leadership, we're talking about people. So, and leadership, is it just the superintendent and principal?
No, it's everybody.
It's you guys around the table. It's other leaders in the building, whether they're anointed or not anointed. Okay, John. Yeah, there's John. We can blame John. But we also have student. There's leadership even among students, and so leadership can be defined a multitude of ways. John?
One question.
Sure.
On students, can you give me an example of a student piece that might come up that is in our control?
Well, it's knowledge. We think of the people as knowledge that they bring, skills or disposition. So, if students come hating writing, for example, okay, and that may very well be true. We could survey them and they go, I hate writing. Okay, well then we have to solve that somehow, because that attitude that they bring with them, even though we can't control it, we can control how to deal with it.
Go back to previous instruction or curriculum.
Yeah, it could. Absolutely. Or it could go to repeated failure in the classroom. because that's an instructional piece where we've never shown this child any success in a particular subject. Wouldn't you hate it if you were, if you never, whatever? So yeah, it's what they bring to the table as people. Good question. Others? So the direction for like the next 15 minutes or so is to choose one of your issues, just one that you think is significant in reading, writing, or math, and then kind of go through those. You don't have to necessarily get to all of them, and in some there may not be. There might not be a student issue that is important enough to chart down. But what are the most important ones? We'll chart those. We'll look at those. We'll talk about them. Okay. Let's debrief this. Let's kind of talk a little bit about this. Let's think about what we might, if we were going to start to prioritize. What are we going to deal with first? How are we going to attack these particular issues? How we would prioritize, how we would confirm some things. Compare this, keep in mind, compare this, which you've generated today, with the list that you generated. It was a much larger list that we condensed back in June when we had people from all over the district. Think about, we had just a little bit of data again today. We didn't go through 35 pages worth of data. We had like 3 pages worth of data, simple. Okay, and we've generated, I think, some pretty, I think you've hit the nail on the head in some of these places. These are some big ideas, big things that would probably, if we addressed them, and if public schools all over address them, we might see some different results. So I think even though this didn't take a long time, it comes from, having looked at phase 1 and phase 2, and you've generated, I think, a decent list. So let's talk through it for a moment. Let's do one at a time. Jamie, do you want to talk us through? This one is that over 50% of students with disabilities are still in the bottom 30% in reading. And go ahead.
When we talked about the infrastructure, we currently have a new schedule in place, but actually, and it has solved a lot of problems, but what it doesn't do, it still doesn't allow us to serve our most at need, because most of our at-risk kids are, many of them qualify in special ed, or they'll qualify in speech, and they qualify for title services. Mm-hmm. So, and during our one encore period, we're pulling for everything. So if they're pulled for speech, they obviously can't be in for the intervention, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So we've certainly made a forward motion, but we haven't solved it all yet. No.
Okay, all right.
With the curriculum, in the past, our students with disabilities had different curriculums altogether. Uh-huh. And so there was absolutely no way for the kids to learn the Common Core because they were pulled during Common Core.
Right.
And
so never really getting grade level instruction, right. Although the test measures
grade level instruction.
Mm-hmm. When you say had, does that mean that's not the case anymore?
I don't think that's the case. I know that in
every
fourth
grade
grade
in core, in math and reading. That's all I can promise, and I think science and social studies.
Okay. That's a huge change, is it not?
One child is in a different grade level core,
right?
But that was the only one that wasn't core.
That's a huge systemic change. And again, remember that this data we looked at is a year old. Okay, so we're yeah, okay. Go ahead.
As far as leadership, there wasn't an emphasis that, the belief system was in place, but it wasn't really emphasized that all students can learn, and we had a huge push for that at the beginning of the year, and training basically on what does that look like, and how are we going to make sure that we kind of carry forward that belief statement, mission, and vision.
Yeah.
And
how would we know if that were working?
I think you can tell during when you have meetings and the way that the teachers are communicating about their students. And we also gave each other the permission to call each other out if someone does make a comment that is negative, kind of negative to that belief system.
Okay.
Keeping tabs on teachers to make sure that those needs of the students with disabilities are being met.
Okay.
I think that there's more of an awareness of that as well.
Okay.
The students, we do notice with our kids that there is a lot of learned helplessness.
Well, define that, would you?
That they just, I think for a while they haven't been they haven't felt as accountable as the other students.
Okay.
Or somewhere along the way they learned the message that they are not as able to meet the standards that the other students do. So if they're
they give up?
Yeah, if they give up, or
They give up?
if you don't believe in me, I'm not going to believe in me.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's definitely something that the leadership, the vision, mission, and belief statement definitely identifies.
Okay.
And that they just weren't accountable for their own learning. I think sometimes sometimes I'm not sure they know what they're learning, especially if it's a separate curriculum.
Okay. So is that, if they're not really sure what they're learning, is that a student issue or an instructional issue?
Both. I would say more instructional.
Right, more instructional. Yep, okay, good.
And teachers' lack of knowledge of how to best meet the needs of the students with disabilities. And if you look even historically, there were many teachers that there was like a lack of ownership with these kids, my kids versus your kids.
Yep.
And that's definitely changed again, going back to the leadership with the vision.
Okay.
These statements. And then instruction, I think we definitely feel like as we need more training and more tools and more opportunities to collaborate grade level, across the grade level, across the district, and from grade level to grade level to, to kind of have a vertical alignment of what are you doing here and then what are we doing?
Okay. All right. So you kind of talk about it as if this is in motion and you're working on these. Is there an area of priority still where you really need to focus?
I think we talked about the infrastructure is still.
Here?
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely moved forward, but there's still a ways to go because those most at-risk kids are still not receiving everything that they should be receiving because they meet so many of the other.
So let me ask you a difficult question. What happens if next year, when we look at the data from the MEP we just took, what if those numbers haven't moved?
It's likely that they won't have moved because we didn't have an infrastructure in place last year.
Okay, so this is just this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a whole another year before we'll even measure on the test to see if we're getting moved. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, good. And what about you guys? 50% proficient in math, and you identified some key ideas here. Jenny, take us through that list, would you please? I get to pick on you. I only have a little bit of time left. Miss, you in the gray sweater?
Actually, about 60% proficient in math.
Okay.
Just looking at some of that. For infrastructure, a lack of an appropriate intervention for Tier 2.
Okay.
We're not progress monitoring those kids frequently enough or at all.
Okay.
The question was raised, do we have the right people in the right place?
Intervention-wise, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so have we put our resources where they need to be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a person that's maybe comfortable doing that.
Okay.
In that position. And then early interventions for the K2. Yeah.
Okay.
For leadership, we said Pat said the monitoring of the implementation of our programs, remediation, are people putting the training into the appropriate use?
Okay.
And is she following through with that?
Right.
Pat said it, not me.
Okay.
Resource needs response. Help me with that.
Do your resources need improvement? Do you need different resources? So
Do they respond? Yeah. Do they respond?
So is the leadership responding when we need a resource? Okay.
And then we had to throw this out there. The evaluation
Sure.
process for teachers is extremely overwhelming, and it feels unsafe because we don't know. We feel safe with our leader, but we don't know what's happening to this number that we're all going to be given.
Right.
Is it going to be published? Will parents see this? Will it be on the website?
Right.
Will people lose their jobs? So it's created an unsafe environment.
And how does that impact student achievement in math?
You're not going to do a lot of collaborating.
All right, there you go. Absolutely. Yep, you become very competitive, actually.
Yes.
All right, good. All right, I see the connection. All right.
For curriculum, is there clear communication of the expectations and implementation? Clear understanding of the Common Core? Do people get together enough and actually have discussions about this? Some are open to interpretation. And a lack of guaranteed viable, rigorous curriculum.
Okay. Sure.
Getting there.
Getting there.
Instruction, different teachers have different
Comfort,
levels
yeah.
of comfort in their delivery, so that creates inconsistency. And
I know.
it prevents coaching.
We talked about like your instruction in terms of if that's not my strength, you and I should be teaming
Okay.
so that I get better at it, because she can't be responsible for everybody.
Right.
So that means that if I'm an area of weakness, I need her to go, Mary, this is what I saw, this is what I saw. So that's a coaching model,
Yep.
or a team teaching model, so that you're rising the instructional level for everybody.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, and then the depth of knowledge, what kinds of questions are teachers asking?
Right.
Instruction.
Sure.
For teaching, we said that all staff absolutely non-negotiable have to believe in the mission statement,
Yep.
belief statements. Teacher confidence, depending on your subject level.
Yep.
Bonding with students and motivating your students. If a teacher bonds with their students, they're going to be more likely to motivate their students to be successful.
Is that something that a teacher does if they want to? So is that a will there? I mean, can I bond with this? Can I will myself to bond with a student? Yes. Okay. So it's that disposition piece, right? Okay. I'm just making sure I understand what you're saying. Okay.
And the passionate teachers obviously have more success.
Sure.
And then which teachers are reflective? Which teachers stop and say, okay, I need to improve in this area, coach me in science instruction. Which teachers?
I know it's out of my comfort zone, so I need more help. Okay, sure.
And then we thought with students that students need to be taught, regardless of disabilities or home life or economic status, to be responsible for their own learning, to set goals, and to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in you, what you need to do here.
Right. Right. That's a pretty huge list. I mean, when you think about, again, I think you've all done a great job of really starting to understand the complexity of how you solve the problem. And I know that last year you put a lot of things in place having worked on this. Is there anything new up there that we haven't really talked a lot about before? Is there something as we compare that filter there, which was a condensed version, are there new things that we think are also still important that maybe didn't hit that list? Not that that's the only thing we're working on, because it's not. But those were the big ideas that generated the district improvement plan and the school improvement plans. But is there something that we should add to that list?
I think developing leadership and coaching and monitoring strategies is not on there.
Leadership, coaching, and monitoring. Those are all huge. Can you talk about them?
Evaluating and trying to discuss, do I feel it's the quality I want to do? No. Because I have to do this. That's a given.
Right. You have X number of people. You must do them all. You have no assistant.
I would really, no, I don't want it to be an excuse. I think I just need to learn in a more efficient way to help them more.
Right.
And I think it could be in all 5 buildings that would be necessary.
Sure. Sure. Not to underestimate or undermine your level of influence, because it's huge, but is there a way that they can assist each other? Does it have to come from you?
The safety part, the part that has to come from me is that it's going to be safe.
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe I have to teach them how to safely interact with each other.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't always come from me. I see some great little meetings that are just out of this room.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So it doesn't come from me. The only thing that comes from me.
Okay. Mary?
I think that leadership piece is so, it isn't just on one person. We all have strengths and we all have gifts that have brought us into this profession. It's Pat and Laura and Kevin and John and Mike all figuring out who's got what capacity and then putting everyone together so that we can get the best out of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have some kind of gift to share. It's how do you tap into that gift and give it to everybody else that will raise that voter,
Right.
as I always like to say, to make the best better. It's really about all of us being leaders in some way, shape, or form in terms of, you know, playing our role and not sitting back and not shining our light because we don't want to make anybody feel bad. It's about allowing everybody to shine their light so that it's just brighter.
Right. Right. That was well done. Now, for the sake of the example that we're creating, let's assume, just for this conversation, that we decided that this comfort level with math was a really big deal. Okay? I mean, Pat, we started the day with that, where Pat said, you know, my teachers are reading specialists. As a building, we're full of reading knowledge and expertise. Not so much. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't know how to do what we're doing, but there's this level of expertise that it's in some of the other disciplines we're trying to get to, and we talked a lot about that. Go ahead.
We say that not as many are strong
Yes, yeah.
Math as they are in reading,
Right.
because we do have some strong.
Absolutely, I'm looking at several. So absolutely, I'm not saying in any way that our ability to teach math is deficient.
We had 4 years of intense math training. I mean, I don't know why that would be a problem, unless people just didn't want to go or didn't listen.
Maybe they didn't. But let's assume.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, what else do you do?
Let's assume, though, that our gut was telling us, because that's what this is right now, is just gut. I mean, right? We asked you the question, you put your gut out on the table, and this is what you're thinking. For the sake of the example, how would we go about confirming, if we thought, this was really one that this is where we had to start, how would we confirm that? What would we do? What are some possible, how could we, before we solve it, I mean, we don't want to spend a lot of time here if this isn't it. Right?
Survey teachers?
Okay, that's one way we could do it. We could survey them, some anonymous, very comfortable survey where we could say, how comfortable are you with this? And there's an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, teaching math scares the what's it out of me. Okay, so there's one way.
It may come back to my dad. And I then at that point have to be honest with myself and with everybody else to just say, I can't teach energy very well. I'm an awesome bio teacher, but the energy is not my gift.
Yep.
So I need Lisa Harbour or Donna Cuthbert to step in and say, okay, you got to teach this, Mary. It is what it is. But here are the things that we would suggest that would help you get there.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think that goes back to, as our principles, that really goes back to what you said earlier, and that's that safe environment. I guess when we move a lot, we have new people come in, and a lot of times we forget that we need to continue to discuss the PLC, what are effective groups, how do you communicate with each other. These are the expectations so that it's still a safe thing. When you have all of those changes constantly going on and new people coming in and going, that those still need to be articulated deliberately every year at the beginning, just to kind of remind us.
And then visit it often. So we do a survey, and Grant identifies anonymously that teaching math scares me. Okay, but I get really good results. Okay, and for the sake of the argument, Jamie says the same thing. Teaching math scares her. She doesn't get as good a results. So now we've just added another layer to the data, right? Because even though I may not be comfortable, at least I'm getting results this year. Now maybe we need to be looking at that, because sometimes a bright group of kids can skew our data, right? Okay, so our data is another way to confirm that. Are there other ways that we could seek out this information?
I mean, I think you can also see it in the delivery of the instruction.
Of course, the delivery quality of instruction, right? Because if I'm freaking out about it and I'm not good at it, it's going to be kind of obvious, right? So there are several different ways that we can really, triangulate that information. Not that it isn't labor intensive, but there's different ways that we can triangulate that to really get a good picture. Because before we would spend a whole lot of time solving that, we better understand really clearly to what degree that's a problem. And I would say that for all of them. I picked that one because it's kind of obvious how you can confirm it, and we've been talking about it all day, and we're kind of running out of time. So I wanted to throw that out there as an example of, before we just jump on any of this, you're going to want to confirm it all, and not just one way, but sometimes several ways to really figure it out before we really know for sure. Jamie may not love teaching math because she loves to teach reading, but she's really good at it. She's getting scores consistently year after year after year. Not sure we need to worry about that. And likewise, I could tell you that I love teaching math. I'm horrible at it. You know what I mean? I don't even know that I'm not even any good at it. Right? So I say, yeah, Pat, I love to teach math. And she's like, oh, honey, come on in. We got to talk. Right? Because your kids never pass the test. What are we doing? So one measure doesn't really give us that accurate picture of what's going on. What would you want to say? You just look like you want to say something.
Well, I get concerned about comfort level with content.
Yeah.
Because you could be completely uncomfortable with the content. If you're to ask any teacher, they're going to like reading or they're going to like math. They'll probably prefer one over the other. But that doesn't mean that because they prefer one over the other, doesn't mean that they are instructionally inadequate.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
I think, there are certainly, I'm not comfortable teaching science, but if I was teaching science, I'm sure it would be quite good because I wouldn't allow it not to be.
Right.
So I think,
right.
I guess I question comfort level.
Yeah, we could choose a different word. We could choose confidence level there. I mean, we could choose any word.
But even with confidence,
right.
I mean, you could be completely
absolutely
unconfident, but be incredibly sound instruction.
Right. And not to be argumentative, but I will.
I think there's a difference
yeah.
there, though. I'm still really good at instruction, but I might not be good at the content.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's two different management and instruction.
Right.
I can nail that
right.
in a second, but I might not still be good at the delivery of the content
right.
in terms of asking higher level thinking
right.
questions or designing well thought out assessments to go with it.
Right.
So that's even a whole nother chunk.
Sure. Not to pick on teachers, but here's another one. Okay, right here. Nobody in the interview ever said, right, when Pat said, can all children learn? What was the answer that everybody that she hired said? Yes, ma'am, they can. Okay, I mean, you're an idiot if you don't say that in an interview because you're never going to get hired anywhere. And we might even believe that, up here. Okay, but sometimes do we believe it here, and then does it get translated in what we do every day in the classroom? Or are we the first one to go, oh, it's that if only a certain group of people would behave differently, or if we had whatever. When I was in a district a couple weeks ago and we were talking about this issue, and a gentleman stood up very passionately and was like, it's the blaming moms and dads. We can't do this until, and then everybody else applauded in the room. It was like, okay, wait a minute, back up, because while yes, moms and dads participating is great, they don't control your classroom. They're not the ones designing instruction, and they also don't have the degrees and the level of expertise that you've all worked hard to get. So do we need them? Yes, it'd be lovely to have them, but do we need them along for the ride in order to make this work? The answer, if we believe some of these things, we would go, yeah, I'd love to have mom and dad or the aunt or grandma or whomever on board, but I'm going to work my magic either way. you know, because I'm going to get them where they got to go. Doesn't really matter. So even though sometimes we think we have a certain, you know, belief system, in practice sometimes it's not as deep as, you know, and the same could be said of all of these. We might have pieces in place, but how do we figure out what we have in place and what we don't? Because the last thing that we want to generate from this conversation is a to-do list for Pat that says, Pat, you need to put something in place that deals with all of this because we said so. Well, don't jump on anything because we said so. Let's be really clear about prioritizing first, because we can't do all of this. Figure out what's the most important. Measure that. Figure out a way to really confirm that that's an issue. Tie it to, if we solve it, will we get anything for it? Because some of the issues that we try to solve, there's no benefit. Right? It's not going to do anything for instruction. So, and for learning, why would we do it? Okay, and of course, then we can pare this all down, which is how we got to there before. I think some of the things that are up here are really important, especially with this issue and with the math issue, that aren't necessarily as articulated there in the, you know, but we're almost a year later, so, you know, we're moving along. Any final thoughts to phase 3? So we would prioritize, we would confirm, then we would worry about how to solve it. In the protocol, if you were doing something much smaller, you know, if we were just talking about a formative assessment from a week or 2 weeks worth of instruction, you wouldn't necessarily take the time to confirm all of those things before you'd solve it. You know, oh, so I taught fractions, I spent 3 days doing that, I still am not getting anywhere. Clearly my instruction, you wouldn't necessarily test that. You'd have the data already and you'd be moving on. But because these are talking about system level issues, before you start jumping after system level issues, you want to do some confirmation and work. Okay, thoughts on the day, Pat?
So that hasn't changed, is that correct?
I think in some ways it has. I think some of these issues.
But we would add, make sure the students with disabilities are being taught the essential standards.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, a little tweak. Absolutely. And if I remember right, we had a lot of conversation about students with disabilities and all that, which is where I think if I remember correctly, a lot of it came into the beliefs and accountability piece. It's embedded there. So here are some other things to consider and think about as we expand that. As we continue to look at who's in our top and bottom 30%, we look at another filter. We want to make sure, yeah, absolutely.